Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Move Exchange webinar on winning more instructions from existing conveyancing inquiries. My name's Tom Lyes, Key Relationship Manager here at the Practical Vision Network. I'm joined this morning by my colleague Sarah Brocklebank, who manages the Move Exchange team. Good morning, Sarah.
Morning, everyone.
Thank you very much for joining us. Today's webinar will last approximately 20 to 25 minutes. Our objective is for you to take away and understand some learnings around how to win more instructions from your existing conveyance inquiries, and we will hopefully give you some really useful tips to make that happen. Those of you who are regular subscribers to our webinars will probably be familiar with my voice by now. So I'm Key Relationship Manager for the Practical Vision Network for the North of England. The Move Exchange is a conveyancing quote conversion specialist business which sits alongside the likes of Lawyer Checker and Today's Conveyancer within our network of companies. Effectively, what we do at the Move Exchange is act as an outsourced quote conversion team for law firms' conveyancing departments, of which Sarah heads that up. So I thought it'd be really good to get her expertise on the call today. So in terms of what we're going to look at today, I just want to briefly run through our sort of agenda with you first. So we're going to focus on where the opportunity lies with winning more from existing inquiries, which we think is in what's called fixing the leaky bucket. We're going to look at the key factors that you need to explore that sit within that. We're going to talk about the importance of client engagement at quote stage and also the importance of follow-ups. And then we're going to finish with a clear call to action on how we will be able to help you. So let's look at the opportunity. So we strongly believe that the opportunity to win more business in a conveyancing department is not necessarily all about going out there, buying leads, paying vast sums for PPC and SEO, and we think the opportunity is in the leaky bucket. So if you average at least 3 conveyancing quotes a day, we know you're likely to have around £1 million worth of revenue from conveyancing at stake per year, and just an extra 10% success in conversion rates will give the average firm an additional 100,000. Sarah, why do you think the leaky bucket is something that often tends to be overlooked?
Yeah, so I think, as you said, Tom, an extra 10% success makes such a huge difference for firms, and this can be easily achievable with just a few little tweaks and processes. For me, I believe there are about 3 main areas to consider. These are time, expertise, and capacity, all of which are dependent on who does your fee estimates, of course, and conversions. So just to delve a little deeper into these, so time, if you have the likes of fee earners providing fee estimates for you, they rarely have time to go a full quotation alongside building rapport with the client, and both of these are quite vital to the process, especially if they are working their way through their current large workload. Expertise, if it's someone on reception or perhaps a support team providing these for you, they're usually taking very basic details to get what we like to call a headline type quote to the client. They are also unable to often answer any starter questions that the client may have. To give these quotes, you need to have quite a unique skill set, we believe, and this will enable us to get the most out of your new inquiries. And capacity, again, this can relate to the lack of time issue. Conveyancers, as we know, are very busy people and are really busy departments. So getting a quote call halfway through doing your workload probably means that the prospective client isn't getting the attention and time that they perhaps need to help fix that leaky bucket for the firm.
So we think we've identified 4 key factors that you really need to consider and get right before you go about fixing the leaky bucket. So the first of those is why should someone instruct you? Sarah, do you just want to dig a bit deeper on that point?
Yeah, so I think here we are asking why someone should choose you over another firm they may have got a quote from. So we know from research that prospective clients tend to get around 3 different quotes when they're shopping around. And I think one main thing to bear in mind is that if the only choice you give is price, then that's all the consumers have to base their decision on. Saying what sets you apart from others can really make a difference here. And of course, first impressions of you and your firm is something that makes a difference in this as well. So moving on to the next point, so what does make you different? So I think here the client needs to hear where the added value lies with you and your firm, so that they have all the information to base that decision on. Some examples of this could be things like your team structure and how you work, if the client would get a direct contact with someone at the end of that phone call. We are seeing more and more apps and portals and technology that would really benefit the client, and they do make you stand out from the crowd. Things such as what your timescales are, and if you specialise in certain areas such as shared ownership, to name a few points there.
And I think price transparency, which came in just over a year or so ago now, I think provides an opportunity where this is concerned. In that if you're confident that you've got these two key factors right, they should ultimately run through your website, they should run through any marketing material we have, they should run through the core of your department ultimately. And that those two things are key differentiators, and I think that's where price transparency provides an opportunity if you know this and you're confident that you've got this right. The final two key factors, understanding your barriers and where could we improve. Sarah, understanding your barriers, how important is this to fixing the leaky bucket?
Yeah, I think this is really important, and it's aimed at common objections that you may come across and how best to overcome these. Sometimes this could be a confidence issue. If you have people doing quotes who maybe aren't confident to set against an objection and say where the added value lies and why that doesn't need to be an objection as such. These usually include things like location if you're not on their local high street, and price is quite a big common one if you're not the most competitive or cheapest quote they've received. And we understand that decisions are not always based on price, so this is something that we need to try and overcome, that way of thinking. And the same applies in everyday life. The cost of Apple, for instance, compared to equivalent products and services, yet a lot of consumers still choose that brand because they know the service and quality they're getting there. And if we move on to where we could improve, so as you said before, about despite fee transparency, there's still a failure to provide an accurate quotation, which then prevents homeowners from making a truly informed decision about who to instruct. And this again links back to the time aspect that we spoke about at the beginning of the webinar, and being able to have that conversation with the client to see if there will be any potential uplifts, for example, inside the quote. And also another thing to point out is that clients that are not yet ready to instruct and proceed, and who are just perhaps shopping around, can be just as valuable as the ones not ready to proceed there and then, and who have maybe had an offer accepted on a property.
And I think that's something that we sort of focus on very heavily at the Move Exchange for the different law firms Sarah's team work with. We focus quite regularly on actually looking at what we call our abeyance pipeline. So whereby we're looking at people who weren't in a position to proceed when we quoted them, but because we've stayed in touch with them, we may have set calls diarised with them, we'll understand their position fairly well, and that pipeline is almost acting as really free instructions as we drive that pipeline, because I think when you speak to that client for the first time, and if they aren't in a position to proceed, you've got a great opportunity to make a really key impression on them, to almost lock them into using you when they are in a position to move forward. So we talked when we're going through the agenda that we're going to touch on client engagement, and I think Sarah's already alluded to a little bit in some of the key factors. But Sarah, do you just want to talk through the sort of 5 key touch points in your client engagement process that your team deliver?
Yeah, so my team are all trained in sales psychology, and it's got sort of proven results. And the 5 steps that we tend to follow are setting the agenda first off. So the client needs to feel at ease and understand how the call is going to play out. And this is all about setting expectations from the beginning of that call for the client. And again, it links back to the very first best first impression you can give. The next step that we tend to do is rapport building and understanding factors behind the move. So this really helps the prospective client to evaluate any decision to instruct and not just based on price. This step also helps to ensure that the estimate is reflective of any potential uplifts, as mentioned earlier. You know, if it's a leasehold property, if they're using Help to Buy, if it's a new build, anything like that. It's important not to go into interrogation mode during this step, and always remember to build rapport in a way that the client will remember you for the right reasons. I think people have the common misconception that building rapport is about asking about the weather. You know, that's not the case. It's about getting to know the client a little better, and recognising their needs. If we move on to process and link strengths to clients' needs. So again, explain the process to the client, and set them expectations, and what they can expect during their transaction. Link your strengths to their needs. If you've worked with the estate agent they're using, let them know. If you're familiar with the area or estate that they're buying, again, tell them this, because it makes it all seem a bit more appealing for the client. So explaining the cost. Always give the quote over the phone where possible. Break down the fees as much as you can, and refrain from using any legal jargon that the client may not understand. You know, this can be quite a daunting experience for some people, and it helps to use a language that they understand and won't feel overwhelmed with. For me, this is a really important step, as without giving the price over the phone, it's difficult to do the next step, which could be crucial to getting you more work from these inquiries. And of course, the next step is asking for the business. So at the end of each new inquiry call, ask for the work. This can be quite daunting for some people giving quotes, especially if you have quite timid staff member who may lack confidence perhaps to close that sale. And you really need to command this part of the call and take ownership of this. And it does get easy. The more you follow the steps and the more calls you do and you're asking for the work, you know, it just becomes second nature.
And I think if we focus on sort of points 2 and 3, which were the rapport building, understanding the factors beyond the move, and then talking about what you have as a law firm that can help the client's sort of strengths and needs there, is if you get that right, that gives you a really powerful basis on which you can overcome your objections. So we talked about understanding the barriers which you need to overcome. If you can get that right, we can pretty much guarantee that people will not object to price as much if that is your main objection to people instructing. For me, that's the really key thing about engagement. My background is sort of doing this for 7 years at a conveyancing based law firm. So I've seen how that works. I've trained people using that methodology, and then the asking for the business bit is really key. One of the things someone taught me fairly early on in my conveyancing days was, when you ask for the business and stay silent. The silent period will win many pieces of business, which is just a little bit of a tip for everyone there. So moving on, the importance of follow-ups. I think we probably addressed that we know that this is an area that law firms fall down, probably due to some of the things you mentioned earlier in the call, Sarah, in terms of time, in terms of capacity, in terms of workload. But I think, again, this is another thing, if you can get right, it really adds value. Do you want to talk to us about a couple of the key points that your team do with regards to follow-ups?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, Tom. This is something that does get forgotten about, and it is, as we mentioned earlier, time, and also if the client perhaps says they're just shopping around and they're not even looking at a property yet, they tend to just, you know, don't follow them up, where they could lead to quite an easy conversion later on down the line. So a few of the steps is setting the scene. So I would say agree with the client when it's appropriate to follow up with them, and don't be afraid to ask if they're getting other quotes, or what their next steps are even, just so you can understand when would be best to follow up with them. If they're getting a few other quotes, you can sort of arrange for the following day and see what they thought in comparison. If they need to go and speak to, you know, mortgage advisors, anything like that, then you know to leave it a couple of days longer. The do's and don'ts. So do arrange a follow-up with the client if they are unable to commit on the initial phone call, or if they need to speak to their other half or anyone else in the process. Do try and get the client to confirm a date and time for your next conversation. So I would always try and pin a bit of a time down, even if it's a vague morning or afternoon kind of thing. And always try to understand what the barriers are as to why they can't instruct and use your objection handling that we spoke about earlier. So if they're not sure based on price, just advise why where the value is with that price for them. And also don't forget about the client if they're not ready to proceed just yet. So if the client says, we were just looking, we're not going to be looking for a month or so, you know, pop a time in diary in a month's time to just call and see where they're up to and just touch base with them there. So staying in touch, which I think we've kind of touched on earlier, is what we use what we call an abeyance pipeline, and staying in contact with the clients here, even if it's once a month or every couple of weeks. Just to see where they're up to, if there's any progression, if you have any questions, anything like that. So what happens when they say yes? The client has said yes, that's great. Again, it's about setting expectations here. This is a point where it's really easy to fall down by not explaining the next steps. The client needs to hear things such as how they will receive that initial paperwork, the terms of business, when it's likely to be sent to them. If the client is going to receive a welcome call from someone at your firm, just let them know that and when they're likely to expect it. And again, ask them if they have any questions at this stage that you may be able to help them with.
And I think just touching on what happens when they say yes element, this is an area where sometimes I think complacency can sort of come into play a little bit, whereby people think, we've won the client, and then the expectation or the managing of those expectations isn't set as well as it could be. What I'd encourage you to think about here is this is your first opportunity to wow the client with your service. And if you get this bit right, there's a good chance that you're reducing the chance of there being any issues around sort of communication, around paperwork, missing documents, missing paperwork, that type of thing. I think the legal ombudsman produced some stats a couple of weeks ago that came out in regards to the reasons behind complaints, and communication remains right towards the top of that list. So the what happens when they say yes bit for me is an absolutely vital factor in terms of wowing the client and really being that first positive touch point in their experience with you. So a couple of other things to talk about. So the wider opportunity. So everything that we've focused on today, although very conveyancing specific, you can take away the principles of that and certainly apply them to other areas of law. I think if you get the leaky bucket right in terms of those key factors, this also creates an opportunity, should you wish to take it, around cross-selling. The natural area that this creates an opportunity for is wills and probate, in particular wills. So have a think about how you might be able to link in fixing the leaky probate with some improved cross-selling. Staying in touch with the client as well is really, really important these days, whether that be through some of the methods that Sarah talked about, so the use of portals, the use of apps, and being able to do that keeps you at that client's forefront of their mind. As remember, you're in a really privileged position as a law firm, and that if you do a good job, they're going to view you as a really trusted person. I think one of the things that we really focus on in what we do and what we've talked about today is all about the people element of quote conversion. So I think if you look at the industry as a whole over the last 4 or 5 years, certainly one of the things that I've seen is the movement towards quote calculators, the movement towards more portals. And I think that has great benefits around client communication, but in particular around quote conversion. I really think the people element has been lost a little bit. So that's really one of the key things we focus on, is that that's still really important. People still want to talk to people, and although their first touch point with you may be your website, which may be important that you have a quote calculator on, the people element of quote conversion really can't be underestimated as to how vital that is. So how can we help you? So there are a couple of things we can do. So the first thing we can do is the mystery of shopping exercise. So our mystery shop will see us carry out 4 calls at different times of the day, and we will assess how effective your call handling is with regards to quotes. We'll provide you with a comprehensive report containing details of the calls, scores, feedback and ideas for improvement. All our calls are recorded, so you can review them yourself as well. So if you'd like to do that with us, you for listening to today's webinar, receive a £50 discount. So that will cost you £200 plus VAT. The other thing you can do is, if you'd be interested in talking to me and Sarah about the opportunity around us acting as your quote conversion department, we're going to leave our contact details on the screen. So just drop us an email or give us a call when we're back at our desk. We're both in the office today, so you'll be able to reach us this afternoon. So if you'd like to go ahead with a mystery shop, just drop us over an email. If you'd like to talk to us about potentially working together with regards to quote conversion, please feel free to do so. Thank you very much for your time and for listening. We've stuck to time, which is always good, 20 minutes on the dot, which is great. Hopefully today's given you some really key takeaways around things that you can implement with regards to quote conversion. Sarah, thank you very much for your time as well. Hopefully everybody enjoyed that, and have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.